Okay,
Good evening. I want to welcome you to the 6th meeting of the General Plan Steering Committee being held Tuesday, June 29th, 2021. Can I have a roll call, please?
yes, Member Wilson is waving, he's here. Member Watts,
Here.
Member Powell.
Here.
In place of Margaret Park, we have Dan Malcolm, the Planning Director, who will be joining us for the remainder of the duration of this committee. So welcome, Dan. And I see you're here.
Thanks.
Dixie Miller has not joined us yet. Kathy Cohn has not joined us yet. Lynn Kellerdine.
Here.
Member Baker is going to be absent, and Chair Wermuck.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Can I have a report on the posting of the agenda, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, our agenda was published on Thursday, June 24th. Our meeting has been posted in accordance with state law.
Thank you. This is a time for public comment. Pursuant to the Brown Act, public comment is limited to only those items that appear on the agenda. 2 minutes will be allowed for each speaker. The agenda includes limited update of the general plan, including the proposed land use plan and projected build out of the plan, future housing units, population, jobs, non-residential square footage, et cetera, and other related matters. Are there members of the public who wish to testify? This is the time that you would do it. David, have you had any requests to testify?
Madam Chair, we've received a few public comment letters that we forwarded to the committee. That was from Mr. Gamble, Mr. Crawford, and Mr. Donaldson. So those three comments have been received and forwarded to the committee. However, if there's anyone else who would like to speak, who is on the call tonight, please either unmute yourself and you can start by providing public comment, or you can raise your hand and you can provide comment. I see D. Crawford has raised the hand.
Hi, yes, this is Dieter Crawford, Desert Highland Gateway Estates Neighborhood Community Action Association. Just want to say thank you to the staff and the steering committee for all the work that they've put into this project thus far. I did have a chance to look at the meeting notes, and I have been able to attend a few of the neighborhood meetings. So I just want to say I would like to see up in Desert Highland neighborhood, I would like to see along Indian Canyon between Corazon and Tramview near the El Mundo Church. I would like to maybe see us explore some mixed use development there. I know the neighborhood is in need of neighborhood commercial. We're looking for grocery stores, possibly banks, pharmacies, things of that nature. So that's one of the only things I would like to add to my comments that I emailed over to you guys and that I also made at the meeting yesterday. Once again, my name's Dieter Crawford. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Maribel Nunez has her hand up. If you'd unmute yourself and speak.
Yes, hi everyone. Maribel Nunez with Inland Equity Partnership. And I just wanted to add to what Dieter suggested for the Desert Highland in the Indian Canyon, that could be looked into for mixed use zoning. So just wanted to reiterate what Dieter had mentioned. Thank you, everybody. And we look forward to upcoming meetings, because we do have the committee that's very involved and engaged in the next phases of the housing element. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Is there anyone else, any other member of the public who wishes to speak? If not, the public hearing is closed. And
Madam Chair,
yes,
can we ask David to forward the letter that we got regarding the Bel Air property to the city attorney for perhaps appropriate response? Because that was raising some legal issues that may need to be addressed.
we can do that, but maybe we can take that up later in the meeting
Okay,
and start with the staff report. The business tonight is a limited update of the general plan, including the proposed land use plan and projected build out of the plan, future housing units, population, jobs, non-residential square footage, and other related matters. I believe that Wendy Novick and Jonathan Nettler are going to make a presentation. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate being back in front of all of you again. It's been 6 months, I can't believe it. And it feels like a year just kind of disappeared there, but hopefully you'll see with what we share with you this evening that we indeed have been working on quite a few things and updating some things. So Jonathan, can you pull up the PowerPoint? Great, thank you. And just maybe get to the agenda slide. So tonight, what we would like to do is on the agenda is just kind of an overview of where we are, what's happened since we last met, and then what's happening in the process, what's coming next. We'd like to go over some of the recommended land use changes, the map changes that you guys had suggested so that we can memorialize the discussions that we have, show you how the map looks, and then also look at how the build out projections have turned out. So what that means for the bottom line numbers for square footage, for units, and that sort of thing. Because ultimately from tonight's meeting, what we will do is take this recommended plan and share that with the community in the community workshop that's coming up in a couple weeks. And then also we will move forward and get that going with the Planning Commission and the council so that we can start the environmental work. So next slide, please. So as we said, we last met, gosh, it was at Christmas time, December last year, and you guys were giving us an update on or recommendations on some land use changes, a lot of things. We were looking at retweaking some of the administrative type things like definitions and how things were worded and some of the uses that were allowed in each area. Looking at some potential new land use changes, especially those related to the housing element, and some refinements to the mixed use areas, and looking at those percentage mixes that are allowed in each one of those defined areas, and actually kind of breaking it off a couple of them and creating some new ones. So we'll confirm those today. Next slide, please. So what has happened in the last 6 months? Quite a few things have happened, and I'll ask David to chime in here in a minute. But a lot of outreach has been happening related to the vision statement. As you recall, council had asked for some additional outreach to the public regarding what additional things should go into the vision statement. Is there anything missing? So to get a read on that. Staff has also been going out in the last 2 weeks to do neighborhood listening sessions on the vision, on housing issues and environmental justice issues in the neighborhoods. And what we will be doing is taking that input and folding some of that into the process of either the housing element, because that will help when we submit to the State Housing Department of Housing and Community Development, showing that the city has done a lot of outreach to the neighborhoods. And then it will also provide some additional guidance to decision makers about some of the changes that have been made to the maps. David, did you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been hearing or attendance at those meetings?
Certainly, yeah. So during the past 2 weeks, we've had 4 meetings in total. A range of attendance from as little as 6 at one meeting to as much as 45 at the most recent meeting. So we've had some good participation, some good discussions with the community. We've heard a lot about housing, which is important. It's important to understand what residents' experience are. So it was really great to hear a lot of what people are seeing as obstacles or challenges. And I know we've had some of our committee members at these meetings, so you've heard firsthand some of the comments that we've been receiving relative to not only housing, but other topics that relate to environmental justice, such as, parks, public facilities, access to healthy foods, and transit. So we had a discussion range on all of these topics. And a lot of the feedback that we got is just that affordable housing, we're lacking affordable housing and a variety of housing types to meet the housing needs of residents. We've heard a lot of the challenges related to just keeping young people here that can afford housing, or keeping people who are in the workforce who may not be able to rent or purchase a home in the community because of the high cost of living and the high cost to purchase or rent homes in Palm Springs. So, again, we've heard other things relative to parks and, some of the things that people would like to see in parks, specifically more shade trees, some more lighting, some different amenities for the parks, such as maybe pocket parks for skate parks or hockey or any other active sport. We've heard, requests about public facilities related to, lack of libraries or a lack of a library up at the north end. Requests to improve programming at our public facilities. And of course, we've heard that, there isn't access to healthy foods at the north end. So, a grocery store would be an important addition for that area up in the northerly area of the city. And then we've heard some comments about transit, some issues, generally that transit doesn't, the difficulties with transit being that it doesn't run often enough. It needs to be coordinated with some of the services, especially for homeless services that we have throughout the city. We heard that the other option besides just the standard bus, transit that we have, that the dial-a-ride service that we have sometimes doesn't work for residents because of the limitations with that program. So like I said, we've heard a variety of different comments about these various topics. So all of this, as Wendy said, we will be evaluating as a part of our housing element, and then looking at ways to address some of these comments that we've heard.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and I think we also will be preparing a summary of the comments that have been received, because as we move forward, the next step for the steering committee will be to start to develop goals and policies for a couple of elements. And so to the degree that some of the input can shape those goals and policies in land use and circulation, we want to make sure that you guys have that information as well. And one other thing, just for transparency and trying to get out to the community as much as possible, we worked closely with council offices, and we're hand distributing flyers and have had a presentation done in Spanish and flyers handed out in Spanish. And so we're trying to get as much attendance as possible. So we talked a little bit about the working on the build out calculations, which we'll go over in a little bit. So that was another item on the agenda. The housing element draft, working through new goals and policies, meeting with the Affordable Housing Subcommittee and getting their preliminary input on the things that should be included. And that was actually one of the reasons some of the additional listening sessions were prompted to relate to the housing discussions. And then we have started preparing some of the technical studies like the vulnerability assessment, some additional baseline analyses for the circulation plan and capturing traffic count data, which is a whole other process when you're trying to do that in a time of COVID. You have to find different resources. So we've talked, next slide, please. So one of the parallel things, one of the parallel efforts that's going on, which we've talked about quite a bit, but folds into what you guys have been doing, is obviously the housing element. And the big goal that we had been working toward in trying to kind of look at this parallel process is that we have to submit a draft housing element copy to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for their first round of review in August. And that's because you'll see as we walk through to meet statutory requirements, the city needs to get approval of the document in the beginning of next year. So there's a flurry of activity that's happening between now and August, which you'll see right below. There's a couple meetings, follow-up meetings to look at the draft housing element with the Affordable Housing Subcommittee to follow up on the feedback. So all the outreach that we just did is getting folded in. The previous conversations we've had with you guys and with them are getting folded in. And although it is not under the purview of this group's scope to review the housing element and review all the goals and policies, we will be providing next week to you a draft of the housing element as well, so that you can take a look at it and see the specific programs that are in there, so you can see how some of the things that you guys have already started to provide, input that you've provided to us for the land use plan has shaped that. Once the housing element has been out, available for your review and for the public's review for a little bit, it will go in front of Planning Commission for their review and comment, and then also City Council review. So our tentative schedule is to have all that done by the end of the month, so that we can make any changes that we need to by the 30th and get that submitted in August. Now, HCD has a requirement to review the housing element that we submit within 60 days and then provide us comments back. So our goal is to get those comments, hopefully respond to them. We'll see, we don't know what we're gonna get. It's different for every city, so we'll see how we do. And then we will respond to those comments and submit the second revision to HCD in October, and then get word back from them again, and then hopefully get a final approval of the plan in January. So depending on what we get, what comments we get back from HCD, there may be another time that we need to come before you to talk about any land use changes, but we're confident with the suggestions that you all have made so far that they would satisfy the requirements that that they need to identify the land inventory for the housing element. So we won't know. It's kind of like getting a grade. We do the best we can, and then we get a grade and see what they say. So that's what's going on parallel. Next slide, please. So with all of that, you can see this is our overall process. We are at the pink, in the middle of the pink stage. So kind of, believe it or not, in between. We still have quite a bit of time to go through all of this by the time we do the environmental, but we will be next working through, I think we have like 4 more meetings with you guys, 5 more meetings, and we'll be going through goals and policies, preparing the draft EIR, and then going to public hearings and adoption. And so that will be in April of 2022. So it's going to be a long journey with us. So I hope, I appreciate your commitment to these meetings and your patience as we prepare all of these documents and navigate everything. The interesting part as we move forward tonight, the big goal for this evening is to really go over, as I mentioned, the land plan and the build out numbers that we have. The interesting part about this process is that when we started, the update really was and is an administrative update. So we were looking at correcting some things related to the PDD. And then housing element came up. So we are asking for changes to the land plan that would help us satisfy the housing element. So that was really the breadth of the scope of this update. We are as we start promoting and putting the word out about the land plan, receiving additional comments about bigger picture changes that people are asking for or thinking about to the land plan. And so we'll be reviewing those with staff. Flynn and David will take a look at those, and to the degree that we can accommodate them, we will, if they are responsive to what we're trying to do for housing and administrative updates. But if they're bigger and they're a much bigger discussion about changes of land use, that may be something that will have to be taken up with Planning Commission or Council to see if they want to think bigger picture about different changes, because that's also the direction that we've been sharing with you guys about how far we can go on land use changes. So tonight we're hoping to get a blessing on those changes that we've talked about previously, and then answer any questions about how we've approached the build out methodology or anything that's in there, so we can make sure we have that buttoned up to move forward to the community workshops and Planning Commission and Council. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan, who will walk through the changes that we have and give you a summary of all of that. And then we'll talk about a few other little corrections that we want to make to the plan, and make sure you guys are okay with that as well. Jonathan?
Thanks, Wendy. Do we want to pause and take questions there? Or do we want to hold until the end to have a give and take?
I have a question.
Madam Chair, what was is your preference?
Yeah, I would like to take quick questions on what you've presented so far.
Okay.
And possibly we'll do it slide by slide as you present us with information you're looking for blessing on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Callardine.
I have one quick question. Could we get an update on the status of the vision and priorities and the other work that we previously did that the council sent back?
Maybe I can do something very quick on that, Lynn. Council still wants more visioning sessions, somewhat broader. The council subcommittee wants to review with some broader groups. The neighborhood sessions, I believe, were for the housing element. And I don't know what the planning is on that, but I don't believe there have been any changes made. There were at the start 3 meetings with the business community. One was the chamber, one was the GM breakfast, and one was the Main Street group. I believe David has notes on those, but none of that was transcribed yet into the vision statement. And I think they wanted to go more broadly than that.
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay.
David, do you have any further things to add on that?
No, yeah, I mean, pretty much covered it. So yeah, we are still doing additional outreach for the vision and priorities. We've gotten some good feedback, as Madam Chair said, from some of the business organizations in the city. As a part of the neighborhood outreach, we have asked residents at each of our meetings what their thoughts are on the vision statement. Gotten some suggestions about the existing language, or the language that has been recommended, I should say, not the existing, because it's changed based on your recommendations. So, there were some comments about existing language. There was also some comments about, being a healthy community, being an active and healthy community, ensuring that, that's what residents see for the future of Palm Springs. So, so yeah, we will continue to gather outreach over the next several months here to wrap that part of it up.
And what we found was that we got better dialogue when we didn't use the answers that had already been prepared, but let people go further afield in their thinking. And there'll be some work to pull that back.
Thank you very much.
Can we go ahead with this? Are there any other questions? I can't see Right now, I can't see people's hands who are on the committee. So if you have a question, would you just ask it? Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to city staff and all of you for welcoming us tonight. It's nice to see all of you again. Hope to see you in person very soon. Wanted to start this section of our meeting with an overview of the proposed general plan areas of change. And we've discussed each of these types of changes in our previous meetings. So the purpose here is to make sure that we've heard you correctly. And in your meeting package, you received an annotated map. It's in miniature on this slide. Hopefully you have a version of it that you can see full size. It has illustrations of each parcel that has a change associated with it, along with a brief note explaining that change. And there are two general buckets of changes. I think we've talked about these before, but there are those that kind of fall in an administrative category, and those include things like changes to the alignment of parcels or boundaries for based on better information that we have today, higher quality, more accurate GIS information, and using other resources. Also includes changes to land uses that more accurately reflect what is on the ground today and is not expected to change over the horizon year of the general plan. And that includes revision to the smoke tree mixed use area that we discussed at our last meeting, and we'll talk about shortly when we review the changes to the mixed use area descriptions. This also includes changes for consistency with implementation of the Section 14 specific plan. We've gotten some additional comments on those that we'll share with you as well. The new changes, or what we might call discretionary changes, are largely related to changes for the housing element. And we talked about this land use or parcels, specific parcels in the artist colony that were recommended for redesignation from mixed use to high density residential to facilitate residential development to meet the city's requirements under the housing element cycle. And then also looking at the site in the northern portion of the central area of the city that had been designated in the prior general plan for the College of the Desert, and now will, with the alternate location for the College of the Desert identified at the Palm Springs Mall site, now looking at redevelopment of that site, which is currently vacant, for a largely residential use. And the density of uses that we're showing there were based on the feedback that we received from the steering committee at the last meeting. Per the chair's comment, I think if people wanted to ask detailed questions, this might be a good place to stop to talk about that area of change map. The next topic is to talk about the mixed use areas. So maybe if there are questions related to those, I'd ask that they hold those, but I'm happy to answer questions about this map or any changes associated with it.
Jonathan?
Lynn, before you go forward, are there other members of the committee who have questions? Lynn,
Madam Chair, I
Oh,
think.
Grant has his hand up.
Yeah.
Grant, please just speak up because I don't see every person right now.
Yeah, I've kind of got the luxury of having 3 different monitors. So I've got you all over here, and I've got the presentation here, and I've got the map over here.
Excellent.
And so as I look at the map, I also pulled up My question is about one very specific parcel, and that is item number 29. And if it would be easier, I could share the screen. I don't know if you want to go to the application of doing that, but let's try it.
I think I have the map as well. But.
Let's see here. Okay. Do you see my screen with the map?
We do.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm looking at the item number 29, which is right at Parkview, close to Desert Park Avenue. And I understand the interest in making the particular parcel consistent with what is actually developed at the site. So I've got the Google map view there too. So it is this residential parcel. But I'm also looking at the zoning map. And so my concern here is that we appear to be changing something for consistency with what is constructed on the site. But I suspect that the original or the current general plan land use designation was made because of the noise overlay, which is the double cross-hatched area here. You can maybe remind me of what the specific horizon is for this general plan update, but I suspect that it would probably be the general plan update after that before there's any possible consideration of redeveloping that site. But the zoning for that site, and I realize we're looking at general plan land use designations as opposed to zoning, but the zoning for that site is professional, and professional does allow for residential use. I think though, if we are faced with continuing increase in air traffic at the airport, that we will be very lucky if the noise overlay for 65 CNEL remains limited to the double cross-hatched area. So just a thought, I was more inclined to leave that number 29 on this map as it is. And I believe that was designated open space. But anyway, just thinking about that as the air traffic is increasing toward the end of COVID. Thank you.
I think that had an office designation in the current general plan, which sounds like it would be consistent with the zoning.
Who's speaking?
Yeah, Mr. Wilson, yeah, that's correct. So the site actually currently has a professional or an office land use designation. So I think the reference of the O is not, it's not open, it's office in our general plan. So I think the reason we were trying to accommodate that location specifically is because they've had, because it's an established use. And our code is pretty restrictive when it comes to modifying existing uses that are non-conforming. So in order to really allow the continuation of that use, I think that was the reasoning for allowing this change at that location. But you know, we can always discuss it further.
If a land use is inconsistent with a 65 CNL zone, or even more importantly, the safety zone, I don't know how far the safety zone goes there. Grant, maybe you know, but that's a pretty inconsistent use. You know, residential is generally not compatible with being located within the 65 CNL zone. I think we saved that somewhere in our noise element.
So the question I have just on process would be, would it be appropriate to stop right now and go through, because I know Dan has also submitted some other suggestions for edits to the areas of change map. So I just want to take a pause because we could work through, and the question is, you know, work with the group, decide if that should be office or if it should be the residential change that we're showing. Or we could kind of put a pause, have this be the first one. We go through the rest of the presentation and then we talk about all the areas of change at one time. What would be the preference of the group or of the chair?
I think let's do a pause on it and not resolve it, leave it as an open question. But just as a comment, not having a huge screen, a monitor screen, I found it hard to look at the map. And it almost needed a big printout that came with it for my little laptop. So it's, I don't know if anybody else had the same problem, but I will always have that problem as I use the laptop.
Kathy, getting a 36, what a 24 by 36 printout of it or something like that would be really helpful for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, so I think it's hard for us to review this the way you want to without that.
So I guess the question is, so if the group was able to look at it at all ahead of time, or if we know kind of each area, because our intent was that we would go through the areas that you guys had question on, but I just want to make sure that we have an ability that people have had a chance to understand and look at it, because obviously we have the limitations of being virtual. So normally we would have that big map for all of you guys to look at. So we could pull certain things up and zoom in on it quite a bit more so that we could see them. We also have the maps, the land use maps that we can zoom in on. Would that help? Or
It will help if you go through the areas and zoom in on them, yes.
okay, so we'll,
and I don't know if I don't know what the city's policy about in-person meetings is, but if people are fully vaccinated, we might be able to do that.
we can respond however you guys would like. So whatever direction we get. Unfortunately, because we have a limited number of meetings, I think if we can go through when we get to the Q&A part of the meeting, because there's not a whole lot of slides. I think Jonathan can get through the remainder of the slides fairly quickly. Then we can spend the chunk of our time and going through the map and answering the questions for you guys and zooming in on those areas to see if we can resolve it digitally. And if there's any follow-up, then we can.
Let's see if we can resolve it. If not, possibly we will schedule appointments for people to go in and see David.
Yeah, through the chair, Wendy and Jonathan and David, I was curious. I wasn't totally sure what the schedule was. I didn't take a look through the presentation packet to see what the schedule was for providing comments on these items. I didn't know if we were hoping to resolve them at this meeting, but maybe if you could just give us a quick idea of what that particular specific schedule is, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, Jonathan, would you mind jumping to the next steps slide? So we could just show that schedule quick. Overall, we were trying to get, because the changes were not, we're kind of limited in nature. We were trying to get direction from you guys. The intent was this evening on the map. So we have, because we have to move forward with the housing element so quickly, all of those meetings you saw with the housing element, moving that forward, we need to know at this meeting that those changes that are included in the land use inventory are okay, because otherwise we can't submit to HC. So that's kind of our most immediate need, because all these things are lined up so closely, because we had to work backwards from that August submittal date so that we could meet the statutory deadlines. So we don't have a lot of luxury of time on going back and forth on comments. So we in July, we're already scheduled. I mean, we're meeting with you guys, and then we have the public workshop on the land use and build out as well. So in a couple of weeks, we're scheduled to do that. So the hope was that we would get the feedback today, and even if it wasn't showing up on the map, we get consensus of direction, and then we would update the map and the build out based upon your feedback, and then that's what would move forward.
Let's, I think that's the goal, but let's see where we get with this. And we might have to have some period at least for people to submit their concerns to you after the meeting and a more thorough review.
And then, yeah.
Do we need to spend a lot of time on this, or can we go through the issues?
I think we can go through the issues.
Yes, please.
Well, wait a minute. What does staff recommend on this, if I may, Madam Chair? Because we're having, a couple of committee members who are making these decisions, but I would suggest let's find out what staff recommends. Because I mean, we're 45 minutes into this and we're now talking about map issues that we could have resolved prior to this, that we should have resolved prior to this, yesterday or day before. But if we could talk to staff, I'd appreciate that to find out what his recommendation is.
David and Flynn?
Yeah, if we can, again, I think the important issue is a lot of the things that we're looking at tonight have previously been evaluated, but if there's something that's not clear or doesn't make sense, or if it's an error or something, then certainly we would like to make sure we have those things cleaned up. So I don't think that the changes that you're looking at are really going to be too substantive to be concerned about, because these are things that either we've talked about in the past, or they could just be something that we could resolve fairly easily. And if it requires us going through each of the sites, and we're happy to do that. But again, I think it's the stuff that we're looking at is stuff that we've kind of already gone over before.
Let's go through a slide for each of the sites and go through the rest of the agenda. I think people can read the timing themselves. They have the slide packages.
Okay. I'll pick it up here. Okay. So moving forward, just wanted to report back to you on the changes that we've made to the mixed use areas. When we last met, we discussed potential changes to both the definitions for the mixed use, multi-use areas and the descriptions of the mixed use areas, including their target use percentages. And based on those discussions, we made revisions that are captured in the document that you received last week, titled Recommended Revisions to Land Use Definitions and Descriptions in the General Plan. It's the one that has strikeout and underline annotations highlighting which changes are recommended to the current General Plan land use text. And so just wanted to report out to the steering committee on the changes that we made, and summarizing those at a high level here in response to what we heard. The first was regarding the Indian Canyon Drive and San Rafael Drive mixed use area. We heard about a desire for more neighborhood serving commercial uses in this area, and heard that in a comment earlier this evening. So we reduced the industrial percentage target or industrial target percentage and raised the commercial percentage as an indication of what the intention was for this area. Changed tweaked the description of this area as well, which you can see in that document. In Vistachino and Sunrise, the changes to this area reflects the addition of the Desert AIDS Project campus as a supplement to the parcels that were already identified for a mix of uses at this intersection. And so those changes were made to reflect the uses that are envisioned under that campus plan, which was adopted last year, I believe, in December. At Palm Canyon Drive and Sunny Dunes, there is a slight revision to reflect more residential uses envisioned for this area, and particularly to reflect the development of the Eland project. And then at Smoke Tree, if you recall, this area was characterized in the 2007 general plan as showing 3 different distinct areas along Palm Canyon East. And based on discussions with the steering committee, it was decided that we would break those out into 2 areas reflecting the western portion of the area would remain with the Smoke Tree title. And in that area, we increased the commercial percentages to reflect what those uses for that more specific area is today. In the middle, we made an adjustment to remove the mixed use and to reflect the uses on the ground there that are unlikely to change during the lifetime of the plan. So that middle portion was actually removed from the Smoke Tree mixed use as a mixed use area, sorry. And then we defined a new mixed use area called Palm Canyon East Gateway, which was formerly that eastern portion of parcels at the city boundary, and define that the vision for that area as an iconic gateway to the city. And then the higher education campus is the change in title for what had been referred to as the Palm Springs Mall area. And that the change in the description and title is reflective of the intent to locate the College of the Desert campus there. And then the change in the target ratios reflects those school and ancillary uses, including commercial and office. That is a summary of the changes to the land use plan and area descriptions. We wanted to move now to a description of what we found when we translated those, what I would say, qualitative changes into a quantitative analysis. And yeah.
This is a question, the 2 new areas, the one especially Palm Canyon East, I think nobody's seen what you're proposing. It was discussed, but it wasn't, there was no recommendation made, as I believe. So that might be good to elaborate on that. And I think people are aware of the higher education campus. I don't know if people know what the eland project is. Maybe you do. As chair of the planning commission, I don't.
I have a question about the Smoke Tree project too.
I'm pulling up the general plan map, proposed map that was in your package, and I'll just share with you what those areas that we were talking about are. Okay. So this area, if you can see my cursor here, was the western portion that has been retained as Smoke Tree. So that's along Palm Canyon. And whoops. The area that was formerly mixed use that has been changed to its its current use, on the ground use, is located here along Matthew and around Matthew and Cherokee. So the proposed plan now reflects the current uses there, which are neighborhood commercial and high density residential. And then this parcel here on the eastern edge of the city, south of Palm Canyon, was previously identified as mixed use, and it was associated with this larger smoke tree area. This is the area that has become titled as the East Palm Canyon East Gateway area.
And what do you plan for that? Because I don't, there's only been one plan that's come through that hasn't been actualized. It never went anyplace.
Yeah. Just referencing the description in the.
You want me to pull up the percentages, Jonathan? Oh, they're not showing on my video.
Yeah, I can just, I mean, the description is in the document that was had went to the committee. It's described as an opportunity for an iconic mixed use development that serves as a gateway to the city. There's a mix of commercial and residential uses described as being of moderate scale that respects the natural features of the site and the surrounding area. I recall from our last meeting, there was some discussion of the that the natural features there are a large determinant of what you can actually build. The preferred mix of uses is 40 to 60% residential uses and 40 to 60% commercial uses.
If we assess the viability of that on that site, as I recall, Kathy, when we looked at that site once before, there was a lot of issues regarding habitat and also drainage, made
Yeah,
the development of that site very expensive.
The one near Matthew Drive had both habitat and drainage. Line 41 is coming in. So in 2 to 4 years, it should be there, which may deal, but the question is, we don't know how that'll deal with either habitat or drainage.
Yeah. I think we might need to do a little bit more evaluation on that one.
Yeah, the area behind it has been, the hills have been given to a conservancy, and a conservancy is buying 4,000 acres above it. That purchase will probably come through in the press in a couple of weeks.
But yeah, I think it's important to note the area that is only in that fuchsia purple color is the mixed use area, just along Palm Canyon.
And it's for sale for $11 million. I just, I don't know what they'll be able to build, because they'll probably have to do an EIR on the area.
And going back to the question about the eland project, that's further, it's the project that's the mixed use, in this mixed use area shown here at the south side of the Tockwitz Creek on the west side of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It has a different name these days? Okay.
Yeah, it was the Palm Canyon 777 South Palm Canyon, and then it became eland.
Okay, so that, is it the brown portion that's being renamed for the housing that's going on it?
No, so we're keeping it still part of that whole mixed use area, but because that is, we know that is being developed as all residential in its entirety, at least for that project, we upped the residential percentage.
That makes sense.
I still have a question on the smoke tree site. Smoker's rights. The translation, the dictation. I'd like to look at the the big commercial mixed use block between Toledo and well, it's kind of between Laverne and Verona, where we've got the two different shopping centers. How would that work as mixed use? Is that whole area really mixed use since it's all commercial today?
There currently is one residential project or,
Right. Okay, you're right.
yeah, there's a residential development within the middle of it. There are some undeveloped parcels that potentially could provide residential. So we wanted to make sure that we, accounted for those potentially.
Yeah, I had envisioned that we would take those undeveloped parcels there in the center and adjacent to the existing housing and including the Coco's site potentially, and maybe even the Bank of America site, and identify them as either mixed use or residential. There's a mixed use residential node in between the two large centers. I have no idea what the property owners would say, but it's still more of a concept rather than having residential all throughout the Smoke Tree Plaza and Smoke Tree Commons site.
And what were you proposing?
Well, I would limit the mixed use to be that the undeveloped sections around Smoke Tree Road, I think it's now called. It's in the center. It's the entrance to Smoke Tree, where you've got the old Coco's restaurant and the undeveloped areas between the Smoke Tree Plaza, where the hardware store is, and the I guess Smoke Tree Road, whatever the road, public street that goes in there. That would seem to me to be an opportunity for mixed use commercial residential, if at all possible.
Does that fit with what David
Yeah. So
Jonathan is doing?
Yeah, so the preferred mix of uses for this designation or this area of mixed use is 30 to 40% residential and 60 to 70% commercial.
Is that consistent with the residential just being on that one area, or would that are you looking at the whole site?
It's the whole site. That whole purple area is shown as 30 to 40% preferred residential and 60 to 70% preferred commercial. And obviously you can tell by what's developed there now, we're kind of at that limit for commercial. So
yeah, I think we may be over it.
Yeah, and that's what I remember from the conversation we had before, was that we were looking at what was already there. So to try to keep that contained, but still have the room and just keep it as mixed use. So it may kind of resolve itself in that.
Did you say again, Wendy?
So when we talked about it last time, we had talked about some of the existing residential being there and not, adding. So that's why the percentage of the 30 to 40% was lower, because the intent was really to focus on what was left to make it commercial. So that's where the 60 to 70% came in. So we adjusted that up to allow for more commercial and less residential.
I really think the city should look at potential for residential in the unused parcels in the middle there. This would be my recommendation.
we have that. We've revised the description to specifically identify what you're saying. So that's shown in the material. That is exactly what we're changing the text to say: vacant and underutilized parcels.
Okay.
Vacant underutilized parcels such as the former Coco's provide opportunities for multifamily residential infill development.
Okay.
And then do you want to just run through the other areas very quickly since we have the map out? And people, if on the commission, if you have questions, please just speak up because I can't see your hands.
Whoops,
Unless David can.
got so many windows on here. It's hard for me to advocate. Okay. So this is the area at the north here. Whoops, sorry.
Here, I'll start and you can fill in while you're navigating the map. So at Indian Canyon and San Rafael, it was an adjustment mainly to commercial and industrial designations. We had more industrial previously. It was 55 to 65% industrial, and it was reduced down to 40 to 50%. And then the commercial was changed to 25 to 35%. Residential is allowed in that area, 15 to 25%, but there was no change to the percentage on that one. So essentially the industrial was ratcheted down a little bit and the commercial was bumped up.
Would that support a supermarket like the neighborhood seems to want? That is the area where the neighborhood has requested some additional commercial, right?
Is the
Sir-
industrial completely built out too? Hopefully.
It certainly could accommodate a market at that within that area. I think the challenge would be assembling the number of parcels needed to
Right.
accommodate a market specifically within that MU area. So if there's other ways that we can look at attracting a market up in this area, certainly we would evaluate that. One of the suggestions that you've received tonight was to change some areas along that what's called frontage road on Indian to a mixed use as opposed to the neighborhood commercial. But that potentially could mean there's still a challenge with attracting a grocery market where you have a fragmented parcels on that southwest corner of Tramview Road and Indian. There is a larger parcel on the northwest corner of Rosa Parks and Indian that potentially could accommodate a market. Potentially, it just depends on if it meets their needs in terms of the size.
Isn't that the one that the city approved, the Tower Market?
Tower Market is located at the southwest corner of San Rafael and Indian.
Okay.
And the MDR zone, which isn't built out right now, that's included in your calculations?
At what was formerly the College of the Desert, yes.
Yeah, and is that, I know when we discussed it as higher density. Is that what you're recommending, or are you recommending it as single family?
This is consistent with what the committee recommended at the last meeting.
So it's a mix of medium density residential, the orange, and then there's high density residential on the east side of the property and leaving the corner for neighborhood commercial.
Okay.
So it's a little bit, so it actually works creating a kind of a corridor residential and a transition to the medium density.
On that parcel, I have a question. Do we envision the formerly planned Sunrise Parkway extension over to East Palm Canyon? Is that coming back? It was taken out for the college, but it might be appropriate to bring it back if that's residential.
I believe it's still out. David, can you confirm that?
Yeah, I think it's still not planned to go through because there's no, with the development of the Mountain Gate project, there isn't a connection to provide to Palm Canyon.
Well, you could extend it to Palm Canyon. I realize there would be some trouble of actually having an intersection there, but that's solvable with money.
Yeah, and we can take a look at that when we get into the circulation.
Yeah, I think maybe we get to the circulation element. It would be good to just flag that to be reconsidered.
Okay. Artist colony here, there were no changes to the description or percentage, although as we had discussed previously, there was the change from a mixed use designation to high density residential to facilitate residential development here at the southern portion. Uptown, the area here, there's no change to the description or target mix of uses, except to remove multi-use from the description. And just we at the last meeting discussed removing that from the definition and just consolidating under mixed use.
David, wasn't there some discussion of changing some of the zoning in that area with one of the applicants next to Coffee North?
Yeah, I believe that's a little bit further south where the brown is between Palm and Indian.
Okay,
That's currently high density residential. I think the challenge is going to be how we address the mixed use zoning challenges that we're seeing when you have some split zoning issues and integrating the sites appropriately.
Vistachino and Sunrise is the next area. Going through the definition, these are the parcels south of Vistachino and west of Sunrise that were added from the Desert AIDS campus.
Yeah, and that was a decrease of residential. It used to be 60 to 70%. And so we brought the residential down to 30 to 40% and the commercials 40 to 50%.
and does that match what's going to happen there? Okay.
And then added, there's a 10 to 20% of the public, quasi-public and medical uses kind of thing over there. So we get a little bit of residential, mostly commercial, and then a tad bit of the public.
Mhm.
Medical uses. Okay. Further south, this is the, we talked about the Palm Canyon and Sunny Dunes Road. So again, the percentages there, just to clarify, changed from 30 to 50% commercial and 30 to 50% office to 40 to 60% commercial / office. And then the residential portion was raised from 15 to 20% to 40 to 60%. And then Smoke Tree are the next two areas we were talking about. Again,
On those, yeah.
Smoke Tree here and Palm Canyon East Gateway here. And then last site is the Palm Springs Mall site, now intended, whoops, keep doing that. Now intended as the location for the College of the Desert campus. So the percentages there changed from 25 to 35% residential and 25 to 30% office to 20 to 40% commercial / office and 60 to 80% school and associated uses.
So no residential and no student housing? Is
Correct.
that, there isn't any in the plan, okay.
This is Kurt Watts. I had a question on the description for the higher education campus area. I was a little confused in terms of how the percentages were being represented, because it was my understanding that with the possibility of the Camelot Theater, all of the remainder of the site is all owned by College of the Desert. So correct me if I'm wrong on that. And yet there's discussion here about those percentages having commercial uses that the campus might be operating. And then it says restaurant, hotel, or commercial operated by the school used for instructional purposes shall count toward the ratio of school and associated uses. So I interpreted that to mean then that would be in the 60 to 80%. And then I was wondering, well, what's left to go into the other percentage? Maybe I'm just misreading it, but it was a little confusing to me. So maybe you could just tell me kind of how the math works, because we've got 20 to 40% commercial/office and 60 to 80% school and associated uses. And so I'm trying to figure out, is there truly 20 to 40% of that total land mass that can be used by non-college uses?
I think the idea there was that in the event that the school chose to have a fully functional operation, if it was a restaurant or some other type of commercial use, that we wouldn't necessarily want to exclude the opportunity for that to be considered as a part of the other commercial percentages.
Okay, so it could go either way. It could be considered a school use or a commercial use.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But if that's not clear, perhaps we can add that clarification language so it's, not open for interpretation.
Getting back to the smoke tree, the Palm Canyon site at, where is there at, there by the wash, mixed use site there. We ran into some trouble legally, or there's a lawsuit issue, I think, when we weren't matching the percentages that were identified in the previous general plan, when the percentages of uses, when we were getting to be mostly residential or more residential than was shown in the general plan. Recognizing that this site now may match the percentages forecast and stuff, but is there a policy that would say what would happen in other mixed use sites if we don't end up matching the percentages that are shown? And I'm curious about, particularly when we have a case of several different property owners, and it's hard to allocate those percentages to an individual property owner.
Yeah, typically the way that we look at it is that they are target percentages. And if you start to get close to kind of tipping the scale on the percentages, it's really a first in. So at that point where you're starting to, if the city's got a tracking system or they're looking at each area about what the mix is, when you're starting to get to that, okay, we're at capacity for that target range, then that's an opportunity for the city to revisit that mix to see if that mix could change. So if another project were to come in to that would put it over one of those percentage ranges, then they could put that in as part of their application, and then we could take a look at it.
So it becomes kind of first come, first serve.
Yeah.
Like an Irvine business complex type of thing. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that there was some clarifying language that we had added to the description of the mixed use zones that added that there's flexibility and that they're a target to help guide development, these ratios, and that the ultimate composition of each area may vary in response to market conditions as they evolve.
So it's kind of a guide. It's kind of it's kind of that stop signal where you're starting to get to a point where it's a tipping point. So somebody doesn't just come in and just do all commercial if there's supposed to be a residential mix. But we did want to add that flexibility. So Lynn, I think what you're wanting to make sure is that, where legally, do we have enough playroom in it, and what does that do? Or are you at a stopping point? But the intent is it's kind of first come, first serve. And then you monitor it and then make sure if you hit that tipping point, you come back to revisit it as a whole of how that area is functioning.
Okay, I think I see where we're coming from, and you just have to accept the fact that there's maybe some variances.
Are there further questions on the mixed use areas, or would it be a good time for Jonathan to go through, kind of the projections? Or do we want to go through some of those other changes where I know we talked about area 29, and then Dan had a couple other suggestions for land use refinements. So do we want to touch upon those now, and then do the overall build out later?
I'd like to hear about Dan's changes.
Madam Chair, is that okay with you?
Yes, it's fine.
Maybe Jonathan, we could skip ahead.
Yes. Okay. So this would be slide 15 in your packet. And I just wanted to point out that we did make one revision to this slide because just prior to the meeting, we got some updated numbers that were run within the parameters of the build out calculations. But just to go through, orient everyone, these are changes to the section 14 specific plan or area. These were some changes that Dan had received or had submitted in response to the draft materials and providing comments on behalf of the tribe. Essentially, what we were showing at the southwest corner of Sunrise and Alejo was a change from an existing multi or medium density residential to neighborhood serving commercial, and which was inconsistent with the recommendations of the Section 14 plan. So we made that change to change that back to a medium density residential use, and then it would be removed from the areas of change map, which is what we're showing here, because it's no longer being considered for change. The other change made was these sites had been shown south of Amato Road, west of Sunrise, had not been shown as an area of change, and Dan clarified that those should be shown as also changing to neighborhood commercial. So this is what the updated area of change map will look like. We'll be circulating that to the committee after this meeting, but I don't know if first wanted to confirm with Dan that those reflect the comments that he submitted, and also
And Jonathan, to clarify with the committee that that on the land use map that they received, those are not shown. So we are presenting these in visual form, and yeah, Dan, we'd love you to chime in if we didn't get it right. So we wanted to make sure that these seemed like straightforward corrections, but wanted to make sure that the group saw it and was comfortable with it before we made those. And so those changes that you're seeing, the bullet points, when we show you the build out for the proposed general plan, these have not yet been incorporated in those numbers. So there'll be some minor refinements and tweaks, but at least this would give you the scale of what that means about adding 2 units and 6 people and then reducing, by 3,000 square feet. So they're relatively minor changes.
What if we like the?
This is Dan. That's correct. What's shown on there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What if we like the original neighborhood commercial designation for the site at Alejo? And
Isn't that right next door to the Methodist Church?
yeah. Is it the only reason we're doing it is to be consistent with the Section 14 plan?
And the Section 14 plan currently has that corner designated as medium density residential.
Does the tribe have a position on what the ultimate use of that, most appropriate, best and highest use of that parcel would be?
What the Section 14 specific plan says, medium density residential.
Okay.
And that's what was adopted too. So we need to make it consistent with adopted documents.
And just to add to that, Lynn, one of the reasons for that is it provides a transition between the neighborhood commercial uses to the south and the single family residential uses to the north. So we believe that to be an appropriate designation.
I guess so. It just seemed like the Alejo Sunrise corner would find commercial useful there, but if we want to be consistent with Section 14, then that's wouldn't be allowed.
Well, this is Kurt Watts. I might also mention that directly to the east of that is a very large apartment complex. So effectively, these would kind of bookend that street, if that's a one.
We want those apartment people to be able to walk to commercial. So anyway, I won't push it any further.
All right, so I'm hearing generally that the group is okay with these changes. So we have not, we've been working on the maps and we have not yet updated the build out, but you'll see those changes reflected in the build out when it goes to the community for review.
We're hopping around a bit, but where we left off was with actually an overview of the build out projections. So if I might, we'll pick up there. First wanted to just give you a little bit of overview on the purpose of the build out projections. And I think it's important to note first that they are required by the state as part of this general plan update. They're also utilized as a foundation for modeling and for technical studies undertaken during the environmental review process. So they help our team to determine, does the infrastructure that is existing today and planned for the future, is it adequate to serve the build out that is shown, determined by the general plan land use designations. The information that we utilize to put these calculations together come from a number of different sources. They come from federal, state, local, regional governments. And we also use those to benchmark the calculations that we build up from the parcel level. So looking at the characteristics of every single parcel within the city. And just thinking more broadly, for us and for your consideration, the build out numbers provide a quantification of the cumulative impact of the decisions that we've made along the way. So those decisions we've been talking about previously in this meeting and in prior meetings lead to the numbers that we'll review with you. So before we dive into the numbers themselves, we just want to provide a brief summary of what those decisions add up to and the changes that are reflected in the build out. And again, I'll review those numbers in a moment, demonstrate a commitment to increased housing production, and those are reflected in some of the changes that we've been discussing tonight around the mixed use areas, changes that we made to the definition of the tourist resort commercial designation to facilitate more residential construction in those areas. It reflects the changing of the former College of the Desert site from a school use to a predominantly residential use. And then at the same time that we're looking at a higher production of housing units, there's also a decrease in the amount of non-residential square footage and resulting from that jobs. We also, in the build out numbers, are accounting for a increasing number of accessory dwelling unit production. This is reflected in the housing element, and it is based on recent trends within the city in increases in ADU production and looking out to the out for the next 20 years. These changes, as we've been kind of discussing along the way, are meant to meet the needs or the requirements identified for the city for its next housing element in terms of total number of housing units that need to be accommodated. And it meets the no net loss provisions of SB 330, which essentially says that the number of total housing units that the city accommodates cannot fall below the numbers that were, or the amount that were accommodated as of January 2018. Okay, and then at a high level, these are the summary numbers that are, captured in the build out document memo that was shared with the committee members in advance of the meeting. There is a lot of detailed tables, a lot of description of the methodology, which we're happy to answer questions about or discuss, but wanted to just at a very high level start the conversation by identifying the major findings. The first column here is showing what is on the ground today. And that is, those numbers are developed again by, as I mentioned, looking at every single parcel within the city, verifying that data, which comes in the form of a format called Geographic Information System, GIS, is accurate, and benchmarking that to comparable data from those other governmental sources that I described. We also here under the current general plan category show the build out projections that would occur under the 2007 general plan, including amendments that have been made to date. So those are any amendments made but after the 2007 plan was adopted up until today are considered as current, as falling within the purview of the current general plan. And then the proposed general plan is those changes that we reviewed with you tonight and we've been talking about previously, both administrative and discretionary. So just to describe a little bit more about how these numbers are calculated, housing units is under the existing category is derived again from looking at the parcel level data. When we project out to the current general plan or the proposed general plan, we use a multiplying factor that is based on the anticipated density or units per acre of each site that is designated for some type of residential use, whether it be all residential or a mix of uses that allows residential or commercial area that allows residential. For the household category, that takes the unit, the information developed above the housing units and multiplies that by the occupancy rate. And I know that we received some comments in advance with raising some questions about the occupancy rate, how that's calculated, how it's applied. And you know, we're happy to entertain those and have a discussion of that, but maybe I'll set that aside for the moment as I describe the table itself. And you'll see that there is a substantial increase between the occupancy number that is assigned for the existing on the ground conditions versus the build out scenario. And that essentially is the vacancy rate based on, or the reverse of the vacancy rate based on the number of full-time residents in the city. The population is derived by using the household data as the baseline and multiplying that by the person per household's projection, which is based on the average persons per household, which is essentially around 2. It fluctuates just a tad over time, but is generally around 2 persons per household. That's how we arrive at the numbers that around residential uses and residents within the city. To calculate non-residential uses, we look at the parcels that are assigned a non-residential designation. So that would cover things like commercial, retail, office, industrial, airport, would also apply to the non-residential portions of mixed use sites. And that square footage is calculated by multiplying that acreage of non-residential uses by the floor area ratio, which is, or FAR, which is the allowable square footage of space determined by the footprint of a site. And then to calculate jobs that are associated with those non-residential uses, we apply employment generation rates that for each non-residential use type. So in the build out document, table number 2, I believe, has the non-residential rates that we've applied in terms of number of jobs, and it's often per square feet for these different use types. That is, and then as I described, just again, at a high level, what we're seeing here, the major differences between, and again, and pointing just to the differences between the current general plan and the proposed general plan, is that what you see is an increase in the projected amount of residential units, again, for the reasons that I had described a few moments ago, and a reduction in the overall projected amount of non-residential square footage and thus associated jobs. So that is the decisions that we've been making from a policy and a land use perspective in numerical form.
And Jonathan, if I could offer a few other just observations and comments, when you really look at the difference between the current general plan and the proposed general plan, the adjustments in the grand scheme of things are relatively minor. I mean, you get about 3,500 more units, which gives you about 6,000 more people based upon, the persons per unit. And you have a reduction of just under 1 million square feet of non-residential square footage, which is 1,700 jobs. So for the most part, you're still in the ballpark of what you guys were aiming for in the current general plan, with the appropriate adjustments made so that we can achieve our housing element numbers, and to really start to focus on that diversity of housing, which you guys had been talking about, so that we could have affordability for a range of folks to be able to live in Palm Springs, because we've been seeing increasing housing prices. So in general, you're on track for that.
I have a question about some of those calculations. So Jonathan touched on the fact that a typical household is about 2 people. Did you just use a standard across the board calculation for that, or did you drill down into the demographics that are specific to Palm Springs, where we probably have slightly smaller household size, and the change in the density that you're proposing, so that some of the higher density uses also probably have smaller households?
Yeah, sure. So the persons per household number is specific to Palm Springs. So both for the existing on the ground comes from the Department of Finance information, and that's and then for the projected historically over time, again looking specifically at Palm Springs, that persons per household factor has been relatively constant at between 1.98 and 2.0 persons per household over the last 5 years. So it is specific to Palm Springs, and it is projected out based on the recent trends in the city. And then what you'll also see is we have in the tables, we have a different persons per household factor that is applied for single family residences versus multifamily residences. So, and then on sites where, or in land use designations that might allow for both types of uses, we ultimately used a blended ratio of those two. But
so on the multifamily, Jonathan, it's a lower persons per household. That's typically what we show that as a target versus the same persons per household across all types, correct?
Correct. It's, yeah,
Jonathan, didn't you, so I read the table, we used roughly the 2-person per household figure for the current or the existing conditions all across the
Correct.
board. And then we varied that to the blended rate in the future conditions, right?
correct.
I have a question about the occupancy and whenever that's appropriate.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I think I understand where we've got the numbers that we've got. That if you look at the table and you see the 65.3% occupancy for the existing condition, that does reflect the fact that we're a tourist town. We have a high number of vacant units. Now, for reasons I think they have to do with the Department of Finance, we're projecting 95% occupancy in the future. I suspect that is high. I don't have any reason to know why that we would go from 65 to 95%, that the number of vacant units because of their vacation homes or whatever, tourist homes or rentals, something like that. I don't know that number is going to go up to anywhere near 95%. Do we have any reason why we're using that number as compared to the?
Sure. Yeah, a couple reasons for that. And I think there's two things kind of going on here. There's like population growth, which is, what happens over time. So that's why you're 65% occupancy. And then there's also, when we're looking at for the general plan, it's the overall, it's kind of like what your capacity is, your carrying capacity. And so we talked to the environmental folks on our team too, just to firm this up. But from an environmental perspective, it's hard for them to say you're going to have units that aren't going to be occupied. They have to admit, if you're showing a unit, they have to assume it's going to be occupied. So when we're looking at 95%, that's, fudging it down a little bit because we know not all units are 100% occupied. But when you're looking at if you have the ability to build a unit, at some point it's going to be occupied. So they have to look at the impacts going out. Now, I know, Lynn, you suggested there was a case too, where they had adjusted the baseline, so it's like, do you bring up the occupancy of the baseline? But the case that you had presented dealt with transit.
Yep.
And so when they're looking at phasing, you have to know that first phase is going to get done to be able to start the second phase. So it's a little bit different here. And the other thing is that we don't know over time, and we've seen with COVID in some cases, a lot more people are working remotely, and now their full-time occupancy is maybe somewhere else because they have ability to work remotely. So we have no way to predict what that occupancy is going to be. So if the unit is there, we have to assume that there's going to be some occupancy. Now, when we're looking at, say, infrastructure needs, the infrastructure in and of itself would have to look at, okay, what's actually getting built and that growth rate. So obviously you're not going to build a sewer plant for all 95% occupancy right now. It would follow what that actual growth is. But when we're looking at the environmental, we have to assume that at some point those units are all going to be occupied.
I understand why we may be doing this. When I did the numbers, if I looked at the population increase due to just increasing the occupancy rate from 65 to 95, that was half the population increase, roughly, by my math, and it may have not been right because I was trying to understand all the details of your model, but it came out roughly half of that. And so we're really, I think, if we're looking at the picture here, if we're going from 23,197 existing, I guess I'm looking at households there at 51. Let's look at the population rather. 46,000 to over 100,000. That's more than a doubling, but half of that doubling is really just increasing the occupancy. And so I think somehow we need to discuss that. I'm real familiar with the CEQA baseline case issue. I think the transit ones are relevant here because it all has to do with how you deal with the background growth that may occur. And certainly we can carry a discussion number of what the existing population would be if it were 95% occupied. And I think,
And I think-
actually that record, we get that on our peak weekend days, probably. That is the actual population of the city during the season on peak weekends. And in some cases, we do need to be building our infrastructure to deal with that. But I just leaving it the way it is, I have two concerns. That if I was a resident and I go, we're going to double the population of the city, more than double the population of the city, and we're making it worse by going to this new proposed general plan, by going up from 95 to 100 to 101,000 roughly. When the comparable population figure really for the existing would be something like, I think I came up with 65,000, 70,000, somewhere in there. And that number's always bugged me, and even in the old general plan, why are we doubling the population of the city when we're almost built out?
Because the number, I mean, when we look at the number of persons that would, because if you're looking at the difference in units and the number of units that you're getting, that's the population.
It doesn't affect units, it would affect people. Again,
yeah.
some impacts are based, some environmental impacts are based on people, I believe, rather than units.
Right, but I'm saying the units drive how many new people are coming in as well.
Well, that's half of the increase in units is only half of the increase that we're projecting. Half of the other half is this change in the occupancy rate.
This is Kurt Watts, if I might be able to add in. I, share the views in terms of what the visual of this is. And my question was initially, if we have these higher numbers without any comment related to it in there about what our typical occupancy has been historically or whatever, can this higher number be pulled out and in some cases, say, misused for services or things that are geared toward full-time residents? Let's say parks, for example, say because we're projected to be at 95,000, we need to double our amount of park space, when in reality, the people who are having second homes or vacation rentals, which only seem to be maintaining, if not increasing, we might get a real distortion and a misuse of some of these numbers when it's based on an occupancy that is highly unlikely, if not impossible, that we will be reaching anytime in the near future.
Yeah, and I think it's going to have to be a kind of a CEQA thing because it's what's legally defensible. So if I don't have anything to go back on to show, how occupied these are, so if we don't have any backup information to show that, it's okay. So when you have your peak times, your peak seasons, if it's spring and fall, how often is that? What is the occupancy? Where can we get information on that? That was the concern our CEQA practitioner had, because it's like, if you're showing a unit, it could be occupied, and we don't know, even if we did it today and we knew what traditional occupancy is, we don't know what factors could change in the future that would shift that. So there is a potential that we underestimate because we use what was going on now, and something that we didn't predict, like COVID, could happen, and that could push it to 95%. So then we're underestimating what impacts are there. So that's why his message was, if the units are there, we have to assume that they can be occupied.
I think at minimum, we can have a discussion of the 95% occupancy number for the current for existing conditions.
Okay.
Recognize that. And it really creates a practical problem for the city too. Because we're a weird city this way. For example, when we talk about crime rates in the city, to calculate crime rates, we calculate it with the 46,000 number as the basis or something like that.
Right.
But when we have crime, it's really based, we have all the tourists in town as well, which are really potential criminals, all of them. No, that really should be considered as part of the base. And
yeah, and I understand it's a kind of a conundrum, because you guys are a special city when it relates to the tourism and who's actually there. But what the general plan looks at is capacity versus what's actually
right.
What's
I'd
actually
like to see a calculation, an expression of what the full, I'm going to call the full occupancy or 95% occupancy current conditions is, so we can get an actual real comparison there of numbers that are like to like. Now, if you want to use the 46,000 as your baseline for calculations of impacts, I have less problem with that, but
Well, the 46,000, it's hard to have a different number than what census and DOF are showing. So we would have to have a lot of backup information, which we don't really have, to do different than that. So I would agree with you. The existing is there.
I still would be, I think I would disagree with that. I would have a discussion of this number. I don't know that I would use it formally, but just say, hey, that in reality, the comparable number is whatever it is, 65,000 or 66,000 if we had a 95% occupancy under the existing conditions. And just leave it at that.
I think it becomes, when I spoke with our CEQA practitioner, it was the ability to withstand legal challenge that we can demonstrate that the population would be higher to use it as the basis. So if we don't have any additional information other than DOF and ACS to back it up.
Are we saying that the 65% number is wrong?
No, I'm saying that comes from, that is correct. So that's the one you're saying, the 65% number. Okay, maybe we're saying the same thing. The population, I was looking at our population and the 65% number, keeping those because that's what's coming from DOF and and census.
Maybe we continue this discussion online because I don't know somehow. I'm not sure everyone else is interested in it, but it's something that I'm concerned about.
Kurt's point was good, it's a perception point with the growth of the village having been a political issue over the last 10 years. And what I think might be important is how it's explained in presentation.
Okay.
And that would be a challenge for Flynn and for David in terms of presenting it. I think you have to do what you need to do for CEQA. That's my opinion, but the people who present it have to explain that it's being looked at differently now than it was looked at in 2004, or whenever we did the last general plan.
Well, our assumption in the current general plan that was done in 2007 assumed 95% occupancy. So we're using the same assumptions that we used in the prior general plan.
Yeah, that's the future 2007 general plan, right?
Correct. So current GP is 2007, proposed GP is what we're doing now. So we were using the same approach that we used.
But as we all know, CEQA is supposed to say existing versus future.
That is correct. They look at the impact. There's two things going on here. The CEQA does the delta comparison of impacts between the existing column and the proposed. It doesn't look at a plan to plan comparison, plan versus new plan. But I was just making the note that approach wise, the proposed general plan approach is, as far as occupancy goes, is exactly the same as the 2007. So I
don't have any problem with that at all.
We have Flynn wanting to speak.
Let me jump in here. Wendy and Lynn, we understand the concern. Wendy, David and I will chat with you about how we present that information offline.
Okay. Great.
I don't want to waste the time here this evening because we are running out of time. We're coming up close to the end of our meeting. And we want to make sure that Jonathan can get through the rest of the discussion points before we end here.
Thank you. Jonathan, can you move on?
Certainly. We've already discussed our next slide here, so we can move on from that. Wanted to also bring to your attention, I think this was referenced earlier by city staff, that there are comments that including additional requests from the public. These are a couple of the areas represented in the communications that staff has received, and staff is, I think the recommendation is that these get vetted through the Planning Commission as we move through that process.
Why don't we move on and take staff's recommendation, unless there are any objections?
A quick question is on the Whitewater area. Is that from right around the Whitewater interchange, the big commercial project?
That's correct. There's a discrepancy between the zoning and the
I understand.
general plan.
And we can move, let's not take those up here. Let's keep going because we have some changes you want us to look at.
Well, at this point, we were going to pause for questions. We've had those. So we can keep going. And the wrap up here was just a look at next steps. And I think I was going to pass this back to Wendy just for an overview of where we're heading. But I don't know if, and I think we actually had looked at this slide at the top of our meeting.
Weren't we asked to look at changed language? I believe we were. I don't know if you have that in the slides, Flynn or Wendy.
So the updated definitions, the strike through definitions that you received?
Yes.
We don't have it in the slides. It was provided in your packet, but if you would like to go through that, we could certainly pull up that document.
Yeah.
And I do believe we still have, I have in my notes that we had that one parcel 29, and I don't know if we closed on that one.
We didn't close on that, and we probably didn't close on the southern, the most southern parcel that you were talking about as well.
So did we want to revisit 29 first and then go to the definitions? I'm not sure I remember which one's the southern parcel.
It was
Eastgate.
It's the southern portion of Smoke Tree, where there wasn't an agreement that that was appropriate.
The parcel next to the Vaughn Shopping Center, I believe, is the
Yes.
one, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jonathan, are you working on Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't tell who was driving which boat. But I saw the furrowed brow, so it looked like you were looking.
Back to the proposed. Sorry, get rid of that bar. Okay.
So are you starting with Smoke Tree and not parcel 29? Is that what we're doing?
We had parcel 29 and the southern portion of Smoke Tree.
Okay, well, Smoke Tree is up, so perhaps we start there.
Yeah, let me maybe just say that, the concerns that have been voiced by both Kathy and Lynn relative to the percentage of mixed use and the environmental conditions relative to the site. Let's have staff investigate that with PlaceWorks and see if we might be able to come back with something a little bit more appropriate for that site. Because this does not impact the housing element per se, I don't think it's necessary that we resolve this evening, but that's something that we can do as part of the land use element when we get to that portion. Would you agree, Wendy, that it doesn't impact the housing element?
I don't believe that Mark is accounting for this, and
Okay.
But we'd have to. Jonathan's saying no, so yes. I would.
Okay, so we've heard the concerns, and we'll come back with something more appropriate for that, Madam Chair, if you think that's appropriate.
I have a dog barking at me. Sorry about that. I think it's appropriate for staff to come back with that later. And that could even be vetted through the planning commission. It's a question, I think it was a question of whether the land was developable and how.
Okay.
I think those are really the questions. So if we can go through the rest of it, let's go through number 29. And then if you need us to, or if people had any questions on the strikeouts, and I'm only doing that because David asked everybody on this group to look at those specifically. If you don't need us to comment on them, then we could do whatever is your pleasure.
We just need a blessing on them. So if it is at the pleasure of the group to talk about some of the definitions, we can do that. Or if everyone has reviewed them and feels comfortable and doesn't have questions, we'll just take what you guys would like to do.
Do people want to just go through the pages, take a look at them and raise any questions you have? So we'll start with the first page, P2 through 5 and P2 through 6. I see no hands raised.
I just had one, I think it's just a typo, but I think the tennis club is this, if you're gonna actually use it, a neighborhood name, it's the Historic Tennis Club. It's a small thing.
It's all right. We want to get it all just right.
Okay, that being the only comment, we're on to the next page, P2 through 7 and P2 through 10. Question for Flynn on in the central business district requiring a specific plan. Would that be necessary in the areas that aren't currently in the downtown specific plan?
Sorry, I was muted. I don't know that it would be. So let's take a closer look at that, Wendy and David.
Yeah, that's what I just don't want to add more.
Yeah, because we've already got a specific plan in the key downtown area. So I don't know that we necessarily need that, but Wendy and David, let's take a look at that.
Okay, and that would be a recommendation for clarification to Planning Commission when we go?
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is Kurt Watts. I had a question relative to the section referring to affordable housing. I'll use the term incentives under both central business district and the mixed use. If I'm reading this correctly, it did indicate that under the mixed use that there could be an increase in the amount of units if it was contributing to affordable housing. But it appeared that under the central business district, in both cases, it refers to 70 dwelling units. So I was wondering if I'm missing something, that there is an incentive for doing affordable in the central business district that relates to something other than the 70 dwelling units per acre, or is it effectively not, it doesn't really allow any higher density or anything than whether it's affordable or not.
And with that, can you look at the language, Flynn and David?
Yes, we can. And
Good
we'll
point.
clarify that.
Okay, P2, the next page includes some of the same development this is the density transfer portion with the mountains. And we have traditionally used a development agreement, haven't we, for density transfer?
Correct.
Kathy, what page are you on?
Oh, I'm on page 3. It's page 3 of the,
Okay. All right, I got it.
and we're now at mixed use areas,
Okay.
P2 through 30. And Flynn, on that, you're intending a very flexible standard that you're not enumerating, am I correct?
So I think those are, this is the preface before each of the specific percentages that we were discussing earlier.
Okay. So we'd go on to percentages under page 4.
Correct, yes.
And these are the percentages we discussed before.
Correct.
Yes.
I think there was one call for clarification maybe on the higher education campus on how those percentages are applied. Maybe we add a little bit of clarification language there, but other than that,
And a little bit of discussion on Smoke Tree as to whether you want to do those percentages by parcels.
do we still want to do that even though most of the parcels that are residential are already occupying that residential percentage? So the remainder of what's left would.
I mean, or all the commercial are, I don't have a problem with the way you've written it, but does the rest of the committee?
We want to encourage the additional residential over those small number of parcels that are left in there.
Yeah, and I think we have language in there that does that, so.
Okay, so that's the conclusion, is just look at the language, make sure it does that.
Okay.
Page 6.
There is a little typo on page 6, at least I think it's a typo, under the Vistachino and Sunrise Way paragraph. That language where it says the northern position of this site, I assume that should be northern portion.
Yeah. Thank you. Takes a village.
Truly.
On Indian Canyon, has the industrial been used up, the percentages? You've got 40% to 50% industrial. Is that currently existing, or would we want that a little bit smaller?
No, I think the current industrial is at the higher end of that, if not a bit over.
It's at 50?
Correct.
Okay, so there's more room for neighborhood serving commercial and residential.
Yeah, that was the direction that you guys gave, so we tightened it up.
Okay. No other questions from anybody on the committee on that. Page 7.
On page 7, we're under Smoke Tree. It would be good to maybe expand that discussion in the last sentence of the first paragraph under Smoke Tree, to add the vacant parcel between the Smoke Tree Plaza development and the Smoke Tree, is that road, or I forget what the name of that road is, Flynn? But it's that large vacant parcel to the west of the hardware, to the east of the hardware store, rather.
Smoke Tree Lane.
Okay, between the hardware store and Smoke Tree Lane. And that's bigger than the Cocoa site, so it probably should be called out.
So just indicate that the preference for that parcel is residential.
It should be considered, certainly. Now, if we turn around and next year commercial becomes the big thing again, we'll have to undo some of that.
No, it's hard making these general plans timeless, I tell you.
It's why we can amend them sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Don't do it all the time.
Who was there who said predictions are hard to make, particularly when they're about the future?
So we have Lynn's suggestion there. And is the current percentage of commercial 40 to, I guess it's 60?
Let me pull that up quickly.
Yeah, I don't have that one handy.
Because it's kind of a, as a commercial
And commercial and residential are measured in different units, right?
Yeah. It's been losing some of its businesses.
This is, I'm sorry, the
Smoke
which
tree.
area? Smoke
Yeah,
tree.
the interesting part about Smoke Tree, though, when Jonathan reads the current percentages, is it includes all three of those areas, and we pulled some
No,
stuff
I
out.
actually was asking Sunny Dunes.
Oh, Sunny Dunes.
Fun to read some of the,
Sunny Dunes, it looks like it's about 13% commercial today.
that's on a square foot basis.
Sorry, that's the acreage, 23% commercial, and it's by acreage.
Is that on a square footage basis?
That I don't have at the moment, I just have the acreage.
Why wouldn't you have left that the 30 to 50 then and have slightly higher for residential? The residential would actually help that commercial district.
I think we certainly increased the residential from 15 to 20% residential to 40 to 60% residential. And then the remaining commercial office would be 40 to 60% commercial. So it's kind of a split. If you look at the area that it encompasses, really north of the Talkwitz Creek area is probably mostly the commercial or office spaces, and then south of the creek is really the residential. Perhaps a small portion. There is a small portion that's part of Cody Place that is commercial, and there's probably a parcel at the corner of
Artist units.
Mesquite and North Palm or South Palm Canyon at the northwest corner that could be commercial.
I'll just leave it. It was a question. I don't need to pursue it. Any other questions on this? Dan, did we take up all of your concerns?
Yeah, we have direction from you. Again, if
What about 29?
Let's go to 29.
the one thing we haven't finalized was 29.
Sorry, David.
Or anything
I was
else.
like, wait.
Or anything else.
That
And
little 29 has been hanging out, and I don't want it to get left.
I mean, what we certainly can do is explore if that will be an issue, because if there is an issue, I mean it's an existing condition. How do we improve that? Do we change the land use or keep the land use office, or do we look for a program to, reduce noise impacts to residential that's existing under the runway?
Well, presumably that house, I don't know exactly who owns it or how old it is, but presumably it was there during or before the aircraft noise insulation program was implemented. And so it does, I would assume, have insulated windows and doors. I'm just thinking for consistency with some of the other parcels in that area, because we do have that as zone P, essentially for that same strip along Vista Chino all the way to whatever the name of the street is that comes out where Sandra and Deborah meet at that triangle. And, here we are 2 hours into this meeting. The last thing anybody wants to hear is yet another idea, but this is very specific, and it's something that I had considered while on the Sustainability Commission. So I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit, but there are 2 little triangular parcels. At least I assume they're parcels, and I assume they're publicly owned, where let's see, Desert Park Avenue meet Magnolia and Victoria, which are not labeled, and also a little bit to the west where Desert Park meets Deborah and Sandra. And I have always thought that those little triangular spots, which I assume are owned by the city, as well as a similar triangular spot farther south at the corner of Saturnino, where Calle Felicia and Calle Lolita go west, could be used for public use, like a garden exchange or something within the neighborhood. But we have them labeled in terms of land use as residential for all three of those. And I don't think that they could be developed as residential.
Yeah, so these these two triangle pieces here?
Yes.
So yeah, these are city-owned parcels. So I'm not sure they could ever be developed, but I do believe they have a general plan designation of, well, they've identified it as O, which is office. So I don't, or excuse me, VLDR, but I don't ever foresee that being developed as very low density residential or low density residential.
Yeah.
But if you had zoning in there, like sometimes, like for instance, churches, right? Those are allowed in residential areas, so are parks.
Right.
So you could still do a garden in there with a residential designation. And I agree with you that the house will never be built there, but there are other uses that are still allowed in residential, so you could still achieve that. But I don't know if it would be worth changing it to something else at this point, because you couldn't really consider it a park either. Or could you?
Hey, David, this is Dan. I just got a comment on that lot 29 real quick. Just the concept here is the reason we're changing it because there's a residence there, and the concern would be probably, is the current zoning general plan, like if the homeowner there wanted to do a remodel to the house or add a casita, would that be what's prohibiting him from doing it because he's not in the right general plan land use designation and zoning? Is that potentially a problem and why we're changing it?
Correct.
Yeah, so I think, if it's a residential house, we should change it to residential. Otherwise, you're causing a problem with that homeowner there that is being restricted to do additions to his house that other homeowners in the area could.
But that's actually not quite the case, because it is, as I read the zoning code, P, professional zone, and permitted use A18A is single family dwellings and related accessory dwelling units.
The issue is that the general plan designation of this parcel is office. The reference, I think, says it's only permitted by the general plan, and I don't believe we permit residential in the O office designation.
And our proposal is to change it to residential?
Right, to bring down this low density residential to be consistent.
And you'll just bring it down one house?
Just to the house, correct.
I think
What's going on with that parcel if you keep going west, but not quite as far as the yellow, keep going west, a couple of blocks, and then go back east a little bit and then down one.
I guess this one is staying.
Yeah.
And so potentially, yeah, this whole block is zone P. So the zoning for this block does potentially allow for residential, because the general plan says you can have residential in these areas. This one parcel actually is office. So potentially, yeah, if this is a residential structure, then yeah, we would probably want to apply the same for that, we're proposing here for this property.
So is that the resolution, is that we apply it on both properties? If the second one is residential?
That would
And
be our
would you
recommendation.
match what's next to it? So the one on the east is very low density and the one on the west is purple, match low.
Yeah,
I still recommend we double check the airport master plan, which the city adopted fairly recently around, well, I guess now several years ago. Double check that we're okay with the safety area and the 65 CNL contour.
Well, let me just go back to David and Flynn on this one. What do you want to do with these?
I think we would seek the okay from the committee that we can proceed with it, but also to investigate if there's potential impacts relative to the airport before we bring it forward. If that's okay to the committee.
I think we should. That's the motion if anybody else agrees. Does everybody agree with that? Can you raise your hands? Okay, we've got it. Anything else you need from us?
Let's see. One of the things I just want to suggest is at last night's neighborhood meeting and also during our meeting today, comments of Mr. Crawford relative to looking at the area between North Indian Canyon and El Dorado. I'd also like to look at that. I don't think it's going to impact the housing element, but again, I want to take a look at that relative to changes to the land use element and see what we can do there. So if the steering committee is okay with that, we'd like to investigate that further and then come back as we discuss the land use element and look
Are
at.
those upzoning questions allowing multiple? I don't know what, I don't remember.
Yeah, the designation there now is neighborhood community commercial, and the suggestion was to look at mixed use in that area so that it would still allow commercial uses, but it would also allow residential uses as well. So there may be some benefits to looking at that change. And again, I'd suggest that we do that as part of the land use element.
So when you say do it as part of the land use element, we would come back to
Correct.
this group and show you because we're not counting on it. So we've got the blessing on our housing sites and most of the land use changes, but there were two to come back to you guys with.
So can I just get a show of hands?
For what?
And mine is up.
Mine's up for whatever we're voting on.
Okay. Flynn, do you have enough
Yeah.
direction that way?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Is there anything else that you need from us today? That you
Yes.
wanted to review? You have our blessing on what you're doing, a few comments, and a few things you'll come back either to this group or to the planning commission with.
And then we'll be having the community workshop coming up. So if you wouldn't mind helping us promote that and getting the word out too. Or what did we settle on, David? The 14th?
13th.
13th, sorry, the 13th.
So July 13th, we will plan to hold our community wide workshop, which will be both in person and virtual. So anyone who's not here in the middle of July can attend by virtual meeting. So really to roll out the land plan.
And where will that be taking place? The in-person portion?
The convention center.
Ah, okay.
We're going to take some flack because we're having it during the summer. Probably can't do anything about it.
So that's why we want to have the virtual component as well.
Okay.
So that people who who can't be here or are at home or we heard that even at some of our neighborhood meetings, some people might not be comfortable, ready to come to an in-person meeting. So we certainly want to make sure that we have that option.
And yeah, we did hear those comments. People who wanted to attend, but who were on vacation and wanted to attend by Zoom.
And we are aware that that is something we generally try to avoid, but because of our timelines for housing element, we're kind of stuck. We don't have the flexibility we normally have. So we're hoping that the community will have patience with us and work with us.
Well, it'll be a precursor to what I think the city council will be doing in the future.
What are you saying, Kathy, again? Sorry.
I think the city council may be attempting to do in-person with a Zoom element for call-ins. So it's a test.
Always evolving.
Yes.
If we have another big panic over the Delta variant, we'll see what happens.
Very true.
Okay, Madam Chair, if there's nothing else, I think we have the information that we need. We can go ahead and close out this meeting.
And we are adjourning to a date uncertain or a date certain?
Uncertain, and it will be published on psgeneralplan.com once available.
So we are adjourning this meeting to a date uncertain. Thank you all. And
Certainly a
the
date uncertain.
public who stayed with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. We appreciate all your input.
Grant, could you give me a call?